Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Music Den. I'm your host, Armando Venditti. Hoping you guys are having a good day. And above all else, start looking after yourselves and one another. Before I get into the topic of the episode, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome back to the channel Mr. Ken Cheshire. How's it going, Ken?
Doing well, Armando. Thanks for having me back.
Thanks for coming back. And the man of the hour, I know how you love being called that, Mr. Jim Bricker.
We had recently discussed some other titles to give me, and I'm going to start thinking of titles for you, young man.
Muppet Man.
They're calling me young man. I love that. Now, ladies and
Younger than
gentlemen,
me.
younger than you, yes. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be tackling a question that has been on the minds of music journalists and music experts ever since this one album has been released, or at least in our case, since we press record on this episode. The band in question is Genesis. The album in question is Duke. The question for this episode is it prog? Okay. Now, that question is gonna you know, fire up some people watching this. I know it fired up a couple of people on the panel when we talked about it, slightly fired up. But just to give you a bit of background, Duke was Genesis' 10th release, was released on March 28th in the UK and March 24th in the US, 1980, reaching number one in the UK charts, number 11 in the US charts, and number one in the Canadian charts. Now, with this album, Genesis, just to give you a bit of background, Genesis were at a bit of a crossroads. They had, finished touring for, and then they were three. And Phil Collins was dealing with some personal issues with his wife. They were heading for divorce. So Phil Collins had left the band. He had moved to Vancouver, and he had said to the other two members, Tony Banks and Mark Rutherford, if they can exist as a band with him living in Vancouver, they were fine. Otherwise, he was gone. So the other two, and as Phil Collins had reflected on, quite rightfully said, just wait a second. Go to Vancouver, get yourself straightened out. We're going to be working on our solo projects. When you come back, we'll reconvene and we'll go from there. You're not leaving the band just yet. So Phil Collins went for about a 2 to 3 month period, came back from Vancouver, nothing was settled. The divorce was on its way. So at this point, both Mike Rutherford and Tony Banks were working on their own solo albums, Curious Feeling and Small Creeps Day, respectively, but we won't go into that. That's another episode altogether, believe me. Okay, so Phil Collins inadvertently started work on tracks that would eventually end up on Face Value. But back to Duke. They reconvened around 1979 and started to work on material that would eventually make up the material for the album Duke. Um, in my estimation, my assessment of this album has changed over time. This, at one point for me, was going to be a desert island disc. Okay, I just I love the album. I love the album, and we're going to get your viewpoint, Ken and Jim, on this album. Um, the album was to be done in one format where they had a series of songs that was referred to as the Duke Suite, where they were going to have a run of six songs, making up a 30-minute suite. And those songs were Behind the Lines, Duchess, Guide Vocal, Turn It On Again, Duke's Travels, and Duke's End. The original concept was to have it run as one continual piece on side one, but the band, in hindsight, before they released it in that format, decided to break it up. The main reason was they didn't want to have the album, the Duke Suite, compared to the Supper's Ready track that was released on Foxtrot in 1972. Personally, for me, it had been an 8 year stretch. I think they could have gotten away with it myself in between albums, right? But that's just my very humble opinion, right? So enough of my jibber jabbering. I'm going to pass the mic over to my two cohorts and fantastic co-hosts, and they're going to give us their take on this album. So, who to pick first? Let's go with Jim.
Let's go with me. So, we are discussing Duke and Is It Prague, right?
Yes.
Okay. No.
Okay, good night, everybody. Okay, would you like to explain?
Elaborate on that?
Yes. Yeah.
No, I'm gonna let Ken go first.
Okay.
Okay, Ken.
Yes.
Okay. Why do you think it is Prague?
Okay. We'll stop the joke there. Um, for me, it's not all the songs I feel are prog or proggy or progette or whatever. But 10 out of the 12 are for me. Um, much of it is because most of the songs are what I refer to as multi-segmented. In other words, it's not just, you know, they start four chords and just stay on that throughout, except Misunderstanding and Turn It On Again. Those two are just kind of simple, you know, simple songs. Not bad. That's not a bad thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know.
But the instrumentation, the song form, and everything is very stripped down. Um,
And look,
frankly, yeah,
just
I
to
agree. Armando, they could have gotten away with doing the Duke as a whole suite. However, just like Pink Floyd did with Crazy Diamond, I like the way this turned out because you start off with Behind the Lines and then you end up with those last two tracks, Duke's Travels and Duke's Ends. So to me, that makes a very, very strong opening and an incredibly strong closing to the album,
I would agree.
which would of course would have only applied to one side if they'd have done it as a suite. And I think that would have made the second side a little bit, um, for want of a better term, weaker.
Yep.
Because it starts off, so many of the songs Behind the Lines, um, Duchess, Man of Our Times, and the other songs I just mentioned, they're very epic in scope. The keyboard work is often very, very intricate and layered. Um, there's even, especially Alone Tonight, we know he's using synthesizers, but it still has that Mellotron feel. Um, or I coined the phrase Mellotronic. So,
I got you. I got it.
but there again, most of the songs are more than just verse, chorus, maybe a bridge.
And then a
Um,
fade out
they're
first.
they're the segments are very distinct. Um, Guide vocal, which is the shortest track, is a perfect connective piece. It's just for a minute and something seconds. It's incredibly powerful.
A minute
And
18, yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and what it does and what it accomplishes, and uh, and the other ballad, Please Don't Ask. Um, that's downright heart-wrenching. That is so incredibly personal with what he was going through at the
Yeah.
time in his
Yeah.
personal life,
Yeah.
and it's incredibly moving anyway. But then if you know the context of when that song was written and recorded, um, yeah, just an incredibly powerful song for such a simple song.
Yeah.
But so it has, to me, some of the best are the ones that really dig deep into the heart, and that can be so personal. and it's also connective as far as that string or that thread that runs through the entire album, as you
Yes.
mentioned before.
Yes.
Um, so to me, it is. And I can still hear, and even on the next album, on Abacab, I can still hear a lot of progressive influence and in form and instrumentation. But like I said, on this album, except for those two tracks, the hit singles, to me, it just it feels proggy.
Yeah.
But I guess it depends on um, what band you're comparing it to, because prog has become quite a diverse genre.
Hmm.
And some prog is just way out there in left field, and some prog is easily accessible. So, but for me, yeah, and like I've said many times before, this is my favorite Genesis album. And
I was just gonna ask you how, because I know this is your favorite Genesis album. I
yeah,
remember this. I remember when you said before. I was just gonna ask you, how, in your opinion, does this album compare to Foxtrot or Selling England by the Pound or The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway? And, you know,
well, I I love those two, but I think this holds a special place because this was my second Genesis album. This is the Genesis album I cut my teeth on,
mhm.
and so the other ones came later. After I bought, and then there were three first. Then I bought this, um, and that really got me into it. Then I went back to the earlier albums and discovered those. Um, it's just different. It's just got a different, and part of it's the production and the
Yes.
engineering. Um, this is where they really opened up the soundscape that they would continue and would allow them to go into that top 40 pop, several albums later.
Mhm.
Uh, but the this is the album that Phil Collins really came into his own vocally.
It's
This is
funny.
where his
Yeah.
vocals are just incredibly powerful.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because this is the album that Tony Banks has also said that this is where he felt that, although he was always thought that Phil Collins had a great voice, this is the album that he felt that he really made his mark in the vocal booth, like, as a vocalist for the band, and sort of
Yeah.
put his own stamp on the songs.
Yeah.
And another quick note, you were saying how Turn It On Again and Misunderstanding being the two singles, how those are the two standouts. It's funny because Turn It On Again is a part of the Duke Suite. The original concept of the track coming from Mike Rutherford, who, little side note, claimed that it was in 4/4 time, but according to Phil Collins, it was in 13/8 time, being the keeper of the beat of the like, because there's an extra beat, the
Yeah.
extra,
Yeah.
on the end there. Um, but yeah, no. And I should also, I failed to mention the these songs like the Duke Suite tells the story of Albert. Okay, I failed to mention that at the beginning. My apologies. And Phil Collins, when they would do the Duke Suite live, as you saw, like in the concert at the Lyceum Theater, he did say that when they went into discussing doing the stuff for Duke, the tracks, that this was telling the story of Albert. Um, but okay, um, Jim, what is your
Hi.
hello? What is your opinion?
Hello. Well, as I
Yes.
said, I'm gonna give it a hearty no. In the is it to the question of is it Prague? Um, I like Ken, hold this as my favorite Genesis album. I have been a huge fan since the early '80s, but this is the only one to me that is kind of perfect from stem to stern. Um, and we talked about that a lot on our mammoth Genesis album ranking video. Um,
Yes, we did.
For me, I'm I'm glad that they separated the the tracks out and we don't have one side that's the whole suite. I think it really would have been a disservice to all the other songs because they just would have seemed like afterthoughts. And you know, um, you know, Heat Haze and Please Don't Ask and Misunderstanding are not afterthoughts. They're fantastic tracks that deserve, all the attention that they can get.
Mhm.
The Please Don't Ask, like Ken said, is just a shattering ballad. It's just absolutely fantastic. Um, so as to why I don't think it's Prague, um, and this came up when we were discussing songs from the Big Chair a few months back.
Mhm.
Um, I just don't think there's enough proggy elements to it to kind of carry over. Um, there's um, most of the songs are pretty short, which usually one of the characteristics of prog is that there's some pretty lengthy tracks. Um, while there is, variety and sort of multi-arrangements going on within some of the tunes, it's pretty short and it doesn't sort of, make its own statement, kind of consider like And You and I from Yes, I think is a perfect way to kind of articulate some of the characteristics of prog in terms of its length, very distinct sections, high level um, of performance and, variety within the songs. Um, there are pieces here and there, Behind the Lines, of course, has its sort of opening fanfare,
Yeah,
and
the
then that's the
keyboards.
fanfare that closes the album. Um, Man of Our Times has um, a couple elements that kind of surprise and delight, but it's not like that some of those Titanic shifts, like again, comparing it to And You and I.
Yeah.
Um, Turn It On Again, has those great sections where it's almost kind of a stop time, before it gets into the choruses. Um, and of course, Duke's Travels and Duke's End. To me, if there's anything on this album that can be closest to Prague, it would be those two, and that's mostly because it's instrumental. And if you take them both together, it's like 11 minutes almost. So, um, to me, this is just a really, really freaking good pop album with prog overtones. Um, and the prog overtones mostly come from some of the connective tissue that holds the suite together, and then just the performances are outstanding throughout. Banks, Rutherford, and Collins are just at the top of their game. Having that time off, I think, really helped them to kind of just cool down. Obviously Phil had more time off than the other guys did. The other guys did their two solo albums, and Phil was starting to write his. But I think coming together back collectively after their break kind of, stoked the fires a little bit and got them, you
Mhm.
know, a little more excited about performing again, and that came through in these tracks. It's just really, really good. Um, yeah, I mean that's
Okay.
I love Duke. I don't love it as a prog album. It's got aspects and characteristics of it, but not enough for me to sort of push it over that edge. I mean, I guess to me, the last album that I could comfortably call prog for Genesis, considering their studio output, would be Wind and Wuthering. Um,
Okay.
and that only applies to certain tracks as well.
Okay. No, I hear what you're saying. My take on the album, for me, I mean, a little bit of backstory too. This was the last album to feature Dave Henschel as a producer. Um, he produced their albums from um, Trick of the Tail through to, Duke. Um, Sonic wise, I think it's a strong album. The drums are more prominent, I find, on this album of all of his production. uh, the keyboards are how can I put this? The keyboards are prominent. The keyboards are front and center. The
Yep.
keyboards are the main heartbeat of each song, basically. I think that if this album has any fault, um, with the exception of Turn It On Again, I find that, Mike Rutherford's guitar playing is sort of buried um, in the mix. Uh, oh God. Is it Prog? Okay. No, and there's another footnote. Please don't ask. Is a leftover from was going to be put on a face value, but it was kept for Duke.
Well,
Um,
misunderstanding as well. I mean, those are
yeah,
the both from that collective time where Phil was just sort of exercising his divorce demons, if you will, and
exactly. I mean,
that's what got presented to the band.
the a little side note for that, what happened was his wife at the time, Andrea, warned him and said, if you go on tour, if you continue with this album and you go on tour, when you come back, I'm not gonna, this was for, and then there were three. And she said, if you go, I'm not gonna be here when you get back. And he thought, wait a minute, we're just starting to break through in the US. We have to keep going. We have to try. And he thought, yeah, 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 she'll be there. Well, when they did the tour, he came back and she had moved to Vancouver. So,
It was a lengthy tour too. There were at least three U.S. legs, and
yes,
they did Japan and
yes,
other
yes.
places too. So
And I mean, they had a breakthrough hit with Follow You, Follow Me in terms of the charts. But when you came back off the tour, she wasn't there anymore. She had moved to Vancouver with the kids. And he thought, oh shit, she's serious. I got to do something about this. And, you know, out comes these songs, Misunderstanding and Please Don't Ask. You know, um, Misunderstanding is more, if we're looking for the lyrical content, he's like, why, did I miss something here? Like, what's going on here? Like, did we miscommunicate? And Please Don't Ask is, well, okay, it's over. I'm done. Like, it's finished. We can't recoup, we can't rebound from this anymore. It's done, right? The marriage is over. In terms of the lyrical content, does it tie in terms of a story, the story of Albert? Um, yes and no. To me, I mean, obviously Behind the Lines and Duchess and Guide Vocal, Man of Our Times, that can all be tied into the story of Albert and on some level. And then obviously it continues with Turn On Again is part of the original run of the six tracks. Uh, but does it all tie in together? I'm not really sure. I'm maybe on some level it does. Um, Go ahead. Yes.
I think for me, you can make arguments to have the whole thing sort of tied together in some loose narrative, but I think that falls apart with two songs specifically. The first being Heat Haze, which is just, this beautiful ballad that seems completely out of context for what's going
What's
on with the
going on
rest
on
of
the
this.
album? Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other one being Cul-de-sac. Um, again, they're both outstanding songs, both by Tony Banks, but they just don't seem to kind of, you would be trying to ram a square peg into a round hole to say, oh yeah, these are part of the story, because just
Yeah.
thematically and what the
Yeah.
songs are talking about doesn't
Yeah, you
follow.
hit the nail on the head. And this is going to sound like I'm copying Jim, but these are the exact two tracks I was thinking of. Heat Haze and
Perfect.
Cul-de-sac do not, as good as they are, do not, in my estimation or my view, tie in overall with the story of Albert kind of thing. I mean, to me, this is about an individual who is a bit of a backstory, like the geek in high school who never really, got the girl kind of a thing. Do you know what I mean? Like that was the wallflower, right? The one that was never asked to dance at a dance, never went to his prom, was shy around women. Da, 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 da. Do you know what I mean? Like, even
Oh
with,
no, I can't relate to that at all.
you know, And I know you can't. It's like, but I mean, as I, tongue firmly
We didn't hang out in high school, clearly.
exactly, exactly. No, but I can understand that those, that's where I'm getting of the story of Albert. That's where I'm getting
Yeah,
from it. The wallflower, the shy kid who never really spoke up and was awkward around girls and didn't really get what he amounted to as or thought of as respect from people, kind of thing, because he was too quiet and shy. Um, but yeah, those are the two songs to me that really don't that are the outliers of the album in terms of tying it in as a theme, as having a theme to it, a
right.
cohesiveness to it. They're good songs. Don't get me wrong, guys. I don't want people start messaging. Oh, you guys have no idea what
Well,
you're
they're
talking.
fantastic songs. Yeah.
They're good
Oh,
songs. They're
yeah,
great.
absolutely.
Um, I I do think it's a strong album. I think that this is the first album to not feature Mellotron. The last album to feature Mellotron on the album was, and then there were three. They moved on from that. And it's funny because Tony Banks and an edited video that he did that's on YouTube has stated that he cannot stand Man of Our Times. That it's
What's
not.
Tony's problem? What is his problem?
You want a list? I guess I have no idea.
Well,
Um,
while we're here, sure.
While we're here. No, he has stated in one of those unedited videos, unfiltered videos that you can check on YouTube that he cannot stand Man of Our Times. It's not one of Mike Rutherford's best songs, that, A, B, C, D, whatever. But I think it's great. Saturate.
I think it's a complete missed opportunity that they didn't perform that live because that's a powerful song.
Well,
I
there's
mean,
a,
you want something that could fill an arena, that would be that.
you've got the drumming from Collins that is so strong. You've got okay, yes, I'll say it, saturation of keyboards from
Yep.
Tony Banks that just it's like a wall of sound, a wall of synths that come in. You've got a strong vocal from Phil Collins that's like, like just guttural in his
Yeah.
delivery. It's a good song. It's a fantastic song.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I don't know what Tony Banks' problem is. But overall, I think, like I said, this was one of my Desert Island discs. And I was thinking about this back in the 90s. Like, I'd take this with me and if I had to go on a desert island, this is one of those albums I would take with me because I think it's just a great album. And Duke's Travels and Duke's End as a tie-up, tying it all together, fan effing tastic. I love the instrumental. I love the drumming on it. I love the wash over of the keyboards that happens on the track. The
Yeah.
drumming that comes in is just exemplary, just amazing. And the fact that, you know, it's very rhythmic, Duke's Travels. You can almost see it being done. I've said this before. You can almost see it being done forgive me for saying this, as a performance piece, as a dance piece, like a dance troupe doing it because of the rhythmic element of it, the drums.
Hmm. Sure.
Very, very percussive, it pushes you forward. It keeps you moving. And um,
Along those lines, there's a friend of mine who saw the Duke tour in Ohio, and
yeah,
he got his tickets so late, the only place he could get seats was behind the stage.
oh my,
However, the advantage of being behind the stage is that he was elevated enough to get a perfect view of Phil and Chester and how they were playing the drums. And he said that, their attack on Duke's Travels and Duke's End was just mind blowing.
yeah,
It was so fantastic to be able to watch them, maneuver and orchestrate that whole thing
yes.
together. He said he doesn't regret 1 second of having to sit behind the stage for that.
No, because you got a bird's eye view of what is going on, and
Yeah.
if you're lucky enough, and you can see what went into the performance of those songs. And again, with Duke's Travels, on the ending of it, with the lyrics from guide vocal coming back in, very strong, very powerful, very emotional,
Yep.
gut-wrenching the way he
Yep.
delivers it. And that's where the thematic premise comes in, where it ties all together. It's like
Hmm.
it's like, okay, th this is what's tying it all together for me. This is what's bringing it all to a close. There's the thematic premise of this album for me. Um, Musically, again, I think it's one of their strongest albums to begin the 80s and the 70s, begin the 80s. Now, the $65,000 question, ladies and gentlemen, is it prog? And,
Well,
inquiring minds want to know. Um, I think it's prog-esque. I think there are prog elements to it. Um, I think that this is where Genesis are starting to turn the tide, like turn the corner away from their prog roots and go into more of a mainstream, I guess you call it top 40 format, but still keeping the integrity of the music of what they're trying to, the message of what they're trying to convey with the music. I think that if you want me to break it down, I think Behind the Lines is superior. I think Duchess is a fantastic track, one of the singles released from the album. Guide Vocal is just a beautiful bridge into Man of Our Times. Man of Our Times, again, underrated track. Misunderstanding, top 40 written all over it. Heat Haze, I'm still, after listening to it all this time, I'm still getting to know this song. Like there's still elements to it that I'm learning about, which is there's nothing wrong with that. Turn it on again, bloody hell, fantastic. Top top 40 track or top 20 track for me. Um, Alone Tonight, fantastic, fantastic, heart wrenching. Cul-de-sac, I'm still learning again about in terms of the meaning of the track. Please don't ask. Gut wrenching, heart wrenching, emotional, relationship oriented track. Duke's Travels and Duke's End for me, two entities all on their own. Uh, just rhythmic, percussive, beautiful arrangement on Duke's Travels, and the fact that they ended with Duke's End. Again, you know how I said how Duke's Travels can be could be done as a performance piece by a dance troupe. And I do mean that because it's very grand, very
sure.
epic, very open in its scope and in its presentation. Duke's End is a fantastic ending, pun, no pun intended, or fully intended for the album, because you can imagine the band playing this out on stage and the dance troupe coming out taking their bows to this piece of music, right? As the song is ending, right? Bringing it all together. I think it's a fantastic 2 minutes and 4 seconds of just unrelenting, fast-paced uh, pop rock with heavy keyboards. Guitars is still there, although they're still kind of buried a little bit to me in the mix. But I think it's a fantastic way to end the album. Is it
Yeah.
prog? No, it's prog-esque, but it's not fully prog. It's not prog in the traditional, yes, Genesis, classic Genesis sense, if that makes any sense at all. So there you
Hmm.
have my answer to the 65,000 question. Is this prog? It's prog-esque. It's not fully prog.
I would like to point out one thing, Armando, where you said this is the first album, to not feature Mellotron from the Boys. This is the only Genesis album to feature an instrument called the duck.
That's
And
right.
and the duck was, and this is, I remember hearing this from a radio interview that Phil did around the time of Hello, I Must Be Going.
Yeah.
It was a call-in show, and someone called in and said, "What is a duck?" And Phil's like, "Oh, very interesting. The duck is something that Tony and I came up with to, simulate a horn section. So when you hear something that kind of sounds like brass stabs in Turn It On Again, or in, Behind the Lines, kind of the fanfare, whether it's in that or in Duke's End,
Yeah.
that's the hack that Phil and Tony put together through the synths to sort of emulate a horn section, which
Okay,
makes, of course, a nice bridge into what they would do with a few tracks from the Abacab sessions.
that's right. Okay. Okay, no, I had no idea because I'm reading the credits. I'm like, okay, what is a duck like in terms of
What is a duck? Yeah,
what is the
exactly.
musical instrument? So no, it's good to know that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Happy to fulfill a public service.
Thank you, sir. Yes, yes, the check is in the mail. All right, you'll get it by February.
Yeah, thanks, Canada.
We won't go there. We've already discussed this off camera. Um, Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Is this Prague featuring the album Duke? Now, please put down in the comments below whether you believe is Duke a prog album or not, or is it prog-esque as I called it? Again, there are no right or wrong answers, just opinion, right? I want to thank Mr. Ken Jeshire and Jim Bricker for joining me on this very interesting episode of Is This Prog? And we will be back, with more episodes coming up. We have been discussing off camera ideas for more shows, and there are going to be one or two episodes where I'm going to be basically, I guess you call it, steering the ship on the topic of the episodes coming up, which, you know what, I have no problem with doing. So for Ken Cheshire and Jim Bricker, I am Armando Venditti signing off. Before I forget, please click like and subscribe and hit the notification bell to keep yourselves on top of any new content I've got coming up. All right. And if it's cold where you are, please keep warm. If it's warm, please try and cool off. And we'll see you soon with more episodes. Bye for now.